Chapter 5. Justin listened to the clacking keys of her computer and wondered what she was writing. It must be something interesting, because other than the brief glance she gave him when he stepped through the front door with his food, she hadn't stopped. She just kept tapping away. He opened the freezer and shoved his TV dinners in. Not his normal fare, but the food had been limited at the tiny store, and he hadn't cooked for himself in months. So he'd been hesitant to buy a ton of fresh food that he'd probably butcher without a recipe. At least with these, he wouldn't go hungry. He had picked up hamburger meat, though. Although he wasn't sure a grill existed at the cottage, he could make a mean hamburger in a skillet if necessary. Maybe she wasn't writing anything at all. Perhaps it was all a show and she simply typed random letters to appear busy. That would be some dedication to a ruse, though. You could only type nonsense for so long before boredom killed you. Besides, she had looked focused. Her long, dark hair had been pulled back in a loose ponytail, and her eyes caught his with a look of surprise, almost as if she had been so into her writing she hadn't heard him arrive. Was he ever that focused on anything? He supposed he had been that focused on the show once, back when he and Peter were just planning it, back when Carol had been alive and challenging him to be the best he could be. Justin shook his head as he shut the fridge door and turned to the cupboard. He would not think about Carol, or Candy, or any of the other women from his past. His job here was to clear his mind of negative thoughts and either refocus on the show or cut his ties once and for all. The clacking stopped and he froze, his hand extended into the cupboard. Had she stopped? Why? He let go of the can of green beans and checked his watch. It was nearly 4, so she must have decided to take a break. He wondered if she would leave her laptop out. Curiosity coursed through his veins. He supposed he could just ask her, but then she would know he was curious. And he didn't need that. She might confuse his curiosity for interest, and it certainly wasn't that. The front door opened and closed. She had gone outside. He finished putting the cans away and stepped back into the main room, his eyes tearing eagerly toward the corner where she had been sitting. But her computer was gone. He hadn't heard her walk past, so had she taken it outside then? Drawn by a force he couldn't name or understand, Justin crossed to the place she had vacated and sat down. A sweet scent of flowers hung in the air. Her perfume? Shampoo? He understood why she chose this spot. The chair not only molded to his frame, but the window looked out on the ocean. As he watched, she came into view. The breeze lifted strands of her hair, blowing them to the side like brushstrokes on a painting. Her face tilted up as if she were soaking up the sun, and then she walked out of view. A part of him wanted to get up from the chair, to press his face to the window and watch where she walked, but he would not do that. Ava might be intriguing, but she was still a woman, and he had terrible luck with women. Ava returned to the cottage when her watch read 6. She enjoyed walking the beach and not thinking for a few hours. There was something refreshing in just letting go, but now her stomach yearned for some food and her fingers itched to add a little more to her story, even if she had to do it in the small bedroom. She opened the cottage door, surprised to find Justin asleep in the cushy chair. He actually looked human and vulnerable, passed out with his mouth slightly open. Too bad he was so cocky when he was awake. She wondered what made him that way. Was it working in television? Had he grown up that way? Ava shook her head as she walked past him to the kitchen. She was dissecting him like he was a character in her book, although she guessed in a way he was, though she doubted the past she had given her character matched his past. It might be interesting to find out, though. She loved writing about people she knew, as it always seemed to bring her characters to life. It was even more fun to write about people she saw and imagine their backstories. It annoyed her friends, though, and they chastised her whenever they caught her staring at people. She couldn't help it, though, as she'd been a people watcher from a very young age. Her mother often dragged her older brother and sister and her along on shopping trips. When they ventured to the mall, her mother would buy them 2 soft pretzels to share, and they would sit on a bench and observe people as they walked by. Her mother would lean over after someone passed and make up a story for them. See that guy with a limp? He was teaching his daughter to drive, and she accidentally put the car in reverse and drove over his foot. They raced to the hospital, but while they were waiting to be seen, an old woman who was half blind didn't see him as she passed, and she stabbed his foot with her cane. By the time he saw a doctor, he lost all feeling in 3 of his 5 toes, and it never came back. And that was how it began. After that, Ava observed everyone, wherever she went. She watched their mannerisms and their clothing choices, committing them to memory. When she took a creative writing course in high school, she learned that she had been practicing characterization without even knowing it. Her papers always came back with glowing words about how her characters felt alive and real. Ava opened the fridge and pulled out a cucumber, olives, onions, and chicken. She wanted something fresh and healthy tonight after her walk on the beach, and her mother's Greek chicken recipe sounded like just the thing. Justin wandered in as she was cutting up the cucumber. What is that smell? His eyes darted around as if looking for the source. It's balsamic vinegar and chicken, my mother's Greek chicken recipe. She dumped the cucumber in the bowl with the already sliced Kalamata olives and red onions. Then she turned her attention to the garlic cloves. It smells delicious. Greek, huh? Is that your background? She began dicing the garlic. Part. My mother is Greek. My father is Scottish, hence the last name McDermott. With a sweep of her hand, she added the garlic to the bowl and checked on the chicken on the stove. It was better when it simmered in a crock pot all day, but as she hadn't thought to start it earlier, she hoped the extra balsamic vinegar would help tenderize the chicken. What about you? She asked as she turned off the stove and retrieved a plate to slice the chicken. What's your background? He looked up from the bowl she had placed her ingredients in. English. I'm not sure what else. His attention was still fixated on her food. She wondered if he cooked and what he bought for himself at the store. Really? You've never been curious? Did you never do one of those family tree things in school? The chicken looked perfect as her knife sliced through it, tender and moist. She added the sliced chicken to the bowl and stirred it up with a wooden spoon. If I did, I've forgotten about it. I wasn't what you would call a model student. Ava glanced up at him. That hardly came as a surprise. She certainly wouldn't have pegged him for one. But that seemed rude to say. Well, you should sometime. It's nice to know your history. She scooped her chicken mixture into a bowl and grabbed a fork from the drawer. I don't know why. It's not like I use it as a producer or a host. His gaze remained locked on the bowl of food. It's not about using it. It's just about having the knowledge. Knowledge is power, you know. He looked up from the bowl. Money is power. Ava shook her head as she picked up her bowl and headed to the table. As she sat, she heard the freezer door open. A glance over her shoulder revealed him pulling out a cardboard box. Frozen dinners? That was what he had bought? With a sigh, she shook her head and turned to him. Don't heat that up. Get yourself a bowl and have some real food. Really? Really, but do it quickly before I change my mind. Justin wasted no time in grabbing a bowl and sitting across from her. The smell alone sent him salivating 10 minutes ago. He picked up his fork to dig in, but Ava interrupted him with her question. Frozen dinners? He shrugged. The show I work on caters meals every day. I haven't cooked for myself in months. Besides, the store was really small. Ava chuckled and bowed her head, and Justin knew she was about to pray over her food. A vice seized his heart, and he forced his eyes to his bowl. He should have known he would get stuck with a believer, and just when he thought Ava might be worth getting to know, he would have to be even more careful about keeping his distance from now on. That was a hole he didn't want to get sucked into again. You don't pray? She asked when she opened her eyes. Not anymore. I put my faith in God a long time ago, and he proved he didn't care. Justin dug the fork into the dish and shoveled a mouthful in. Ava's forehead wrinkled as she picked up her fork. I know it feels that way sometimes, but God is always with us. Justin finished chewing his last bite and stared evenly at Ava. Not when he lets my wife die. Her mouth dropped open, but he could tell she had no words to say to that. No one ever did, at least not words that mattered. Thank you for the food, but I think I'll finish it in my room. He stood and carried his plate down the hall. Justin had come here trying to get away from these memories, not dig them up and open old wounds. He wondered, not for the first time, if that would ever be possible. Ava shut her Bible with a sigh. She had tried blocking out the noise for the last 10 minutes, but the words kept bouncing around the page. They had said nothing about quiet time in the evenings, but she would have to tell him to turn the music down. Why on earth did he need it that loud anyway? And why didn't he have headphones? She grabbed the robe off the end of the bed and shrugged it on. It had been an afterthought to pack it, but now she was glad she had. Her short shorts and tank top revealed too much skin to wear around Justin, even though he didn't seem interested in her in the least, which she found fine because he was not her type either. This loud, blaring rock music emphasized just one of the many differences between them. Ava knocked lightly on his door, and then curled her hand into a fist and pounded when he didn't open up. The music stopped and the door swung open. Justin wore a tank top himself and a pair of cargo shorts. The casual appearance shocked her for a second, but she should have expected it. No one stayed in slacks and a button-down shirt all day, did they? Yes. The way his eyes roamed over her sent a heat crawling up her neck, and Ava pulled the robe tighter. I was hoping you could turn your music down. I'm trying to do my devotional, and I can't concentrate with all the screaming going on. It's not screaming, it's heavy metal, and it helps me relax. He moved to shut the door in her face, and she shoved her foot out to keep it from closing. Okay, fair enough, but can you at least turn it down or use headphones? I have a pair in my room if you need to borrow some. Justin sighed and rolled his eyes. I have my own. I'll use them so you can get back to your fairy tales. They're not... But she didn't get to finish the statement as Justin muscled her foot out of the doorway and shut the door in her face. You could use some fairy tales, she hissed under her breath as she turned back to her room. He was infuriating and obnoxious, and she tried to cut him slack due to the bomb he had dropped at dinner, but he wasn't making it easy. At least he kept the music lower. Ava climbed back on the bed and opened her Bible again, but the words still swam over the page. This time, it wasn't due to his music, but her conscience. With a sigh, she closed the book and then closed her eyes. It was obvious Justin could use prayer, and she could use patience dealing with him.